Now I want to move to Professor Rashed Mahmud Titumir. Dr. Titumir is the chair of IUCN National Committee in Bangladesh. He is a professor of economics at the Department of Development Studies of the University of Dhaka. He is currently holding the charge of the chairman of the department. He is also the founding chairperson of the Unnayan Annation, a multidisciplinary independent think tank. Professor Titumir, you have been in the IUCN World Conservation Congress recently in France. So what's your take on France to Glasgow? Mr. Titumir, it's your turn.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Jillur Rahman, and CGS for organizing this timely webinar, His Excellency High Commissioner, and the fellow panelists. Obviously, while Marseille beaches tick all the right boxes, inlets carved out of limestone cliffs, idyllic boat trips to nature reserves, or to play sport, or to party with friends on sandy islands, and romantic swims in private nooks and crannies. But I would like to talk about Gabura, and if time permits, then I would talk about the takeaways from the Marseille discussion. So let's turn our focus on Gabura and try to understand the linkage between Gabura and Glasgow. Two cyclones amidst the COVID-19 struck the coastlines in Bangladesh, with the waves of the sea take the form of monster. Roads, houses, croplands, fields, shops were washed away by the tidal waves. Many people died, millions rendered homeless. The carcasses of cattle and wild animals float in the river. Forest deer of the Sundarbans came to the locality in search of shelter. Countless people who have lost relatives, homes, and livelihoods have been hit by new storms before returning to a normal life. On the one side, Gabura is the turbulent Kholpetua River, and the other side is the strong current-driven Kopotakko River. Cyclones, tidal surges, floods are the constant companions of the people of Gabura. Due to the continuous erosion of the river, these locality is getting smaller and smaller. The sixth assessment report of the IPCC, compiled by 134 scientists from 6 countries, paints a picture of the plight of the world's climate-endangered people, including those of Gabura. After the cyclones Cedar, Aila, Bulbul, Foni, Ampan, Yas, in Satkhira and Khulna, the ancestral vita or homesteads have gone into riverbeds. Many are forced to leave the vita of 7 generations. They have to take shelter on the embankments. Almost every year, embankments get broken and the localities are flooded. The severity of the disasters is increasing day by day. The destructions are accumulating. The people of the coast have somehow survived by constantly struggling with storms, tidal surges, and floods, what we all call resilience, and celebrate too. According to the IPCC report, climate change will increase the incidence of cyclones, tidal surges, and floods in Bangladesh and 11 other countries in the coming days. Thus, there are all kinds of natural disasters that the world has not seen in the last 2,000 years. The report warns that the situation is now spiraling out of control. Rising temperature has a relationship with increased propensity of cyclones, tidal surges, and floods. After the Industrial Revolution, the global temperature has risen by 1.1 degrees Celsius. During this period, the Indian Ocean has become more heated. As a result, the monsoon winds are getting stronger and causing more rainfalls. That is why floods are increasing along the banks of the rivers. At the rate at which the world is emitting carbon, the rise in temperature cannot be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, not even 2 degrees Celsius according to the Paris Agreement. The bottom line, there is no time at hand to tackle climate change. We have to take effective steps to deal with it as an emergency. The United Nations conference is set to begin on November 1st in Glasgow. And we'll discuss on how much the states will reduce their carbon emissions in the coming days. At the same time, discussion will be held on what can be done to reduce the sufferings of people endangered by climate change in different parts of the world like Gabura. Hamida Khatun, a resident of Gabura Union in Satkhira, was talking to me and our researcher of the Unnayan Anneshon about the plights of the residents. According to her, the embankment was broken by cyclone Aila and the entire Gabura was submerged in salt water. Since then, there has been a severe shortage of drinking water. The water level is not available even at a depth of 250 to 300 feet. They have to run for miles in search of drinking water. Gabura has only one deep tube well for 39,000 people. Most families depend on drinking water directly from the pond. Nazma Begum said that the water of the pond became saline due to frequent storms and tidal surges. The situation became more deplorable. Reproductive health problems of women are evident everywhere. Children are malnourished. Hamida Khatun added that they could not go to district or Upazila hospital for treatment due to lack of transportation facilities. Although services are taken from some local private clinics, these are neither adequate and nor of quality. Saidul Ghazi, a local, said that after Ailia, the cropland has become saline. Now paddy is no longer cultivated in these lands due to increased salinity. Owing to successive tidal surges, the plants do not grow well anymore. Green plants, fresh water is decreasing day by day due to increasing salinity. Most of the agricultural lands are now used for crab and shrimp farming. Many coastal locals, including Gabura, have far fewer shelters than they need. Most of the developing countries have submitted to the UN to pledge to reduce carbon emissions, which is known as NDCs, while countries with the highest carbon emitters like the United States, China, and India are lagging behind in NDC submission. The UNFCCC says that even if the countries that have already submitted NDCs, if those were achieved, the United Nations Secretary General day before yesterday says it would take light years. The world is using 120% more fossil fuels than required to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Despite its commitment to tackle climate change, multilateral development banks continue to invest in fossil fuel-based energy projects. The Urge World, a German-based environment group, says the World Bank invested more than 1.2 billion since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. What about most effective energy solutions along with technology transfer to the developing countries for transitioning to renewables? China pledged yesterday that they wouldn't finance the coal-fired station. Let's see. Rich nation pledged 100 billion a year, a 50-50 divide between the adaptation and mitigation. The reality turns out people in some of the poorest countries are getting only $1 per capita per year to deal with the effects of the climate crisis. As of today, the British Prime Minister shore up to 60% of 100 billion, and that to 11 billion promised by US President, which depends upon the Congress and, as you all know, mercy of Senator Manchin and Republican senators. Developed countries are making pledges without effective measures, which are in conflict with the Paris Agreement. For example, in the run-up to the conference, the host country, the United Kingdom, reduced its overseas aid from 0.7% to 0.5% of GDP, renewed oil and gas exploration in the North Sea, and reduced incentives for electric vehicles. Such decisions conflict with the promise to reduce carbon emission to zero. Although not responsible for climate change, Bangladesh is one of the most affected countries. Added to these is the increased pressure of the forcibly displaced Rohingya population of Myanmar. More than 600 acres of forest have been destroyed since Myanmar's million displaced Rohingyas crossed the border. Soil, water, forest, biodiversity are under great threat. The world leadership doesn't seem to play an effective role in resolving the Rohingya crisis. Mr. Alok Sharma, president of the COP, visited Bangladesh earlier this year and said, I quote, Bangladesh is at risk due to climate change. I have visited the Sundarbans and seen that many people in Bangladesh are living in that area at risk. Millions of people in other parts of the world are also at risk. They need to be helped. But Mr. Sharma's efforts to provide adequate funding, as I mentioned earlier, for the affected countries is yet to be noticed. Sustainable use of natural resources must be ensured without hastening the destruction through arbitrary extraction. Above all, the production system must have to be sustainable, green, and ecology friendly. It is important to get out of the life-destroying system and preserve the natural ecosystem, such as forests, rivers, etc., by emphasizing on the balanced relationship between human being and nature. In this regard, there is no substitute for global cooperation, partnership, and above all, political goodwill. If we were to achieve the SDGs, 3 decades of progress have been washed away by the COVID-19, and widening inequality is further exacerbated by vaccine nationalism. As many of you know, I try watching a film in every evening. Last night, YouTube popped me a British-made for television drama film, The Girl in the Cafe, which was first screened on BBC One. The story is of a G8 summit. Lawrence, a senior civil servant working for the Chancellor of Exchequer, falls in love with a young woman by chance in a cafe. Lawrence takes Gina to a G8 summit in Reykjavik, Iceland, where she confronts the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom over the issue of MDGs, the early incarnation of the SDGs. Poverty, debt, and trade, much to Lawrence's embarrassment and the anger of his employers. However, the civil servant realizes that she is right and tried to persuade the Chancellor and others at the summit to do about the issues concerned. The film ends with a Nelson Mandela quote. I quote, "Sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great. You can be that great generation," unquote. I now pass the buck to the able hands of His Excellency Mr. Robert Chatterton Dixon, British High Commissioner to Bangladesh. Will Glasgow hit to the cries of Gabura?